You're about to listen to the Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders, for coders, about all aspects of life as a developer.
I'm Will, the curmudgeonly experienced developer.
And I'm Beej, the optimistic newbie developer. Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast. This week, we're talking about becoming a T-shaped developer. We'll start out discussing what a T-shaped developer is and what defines the mentality of being one. Then we'll talk about why you want to become a T-shaped developer. And once we've convinced everyone of becoming one, we'll tell you how and some of the pitfalls involved in becoming a T-shaped developer. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
So I'm fighting a lot of very interesting problems that unfortunately are very difficult to isolate. I'm writing a UI using Knockout.js that talks to a generic handler in ASP.NET. This is old web form stuff. That handler talks to a native methods class that's in DLL. And that native methods class talks to a Delphi DLL, doing all the pinvoke stuff. And so I'm dealing with all the memory management stuff between C# and Delphi. And it was working great in the console environment, and it was working almost perfectly in IIS Express with some exceptions. And then it turns out that when you put it in IIS, the rules don't apply anymore. So, I spent most of the day today. There's a function called load library that you use to load a DLL into your memory space. Because I'm dynamically loading and unloading the library because of reasons. And it turns out that thing, when you tell it to load, it returns a pointer to, the beginning of the DLL. And that's great and all, except sometimes it can be null. And the data type that all of the MSDN samples for using this said to use is not nullable. And you'd think, okay, well, it's .NET, so it'll be fine. It'll throw a type exception. It actually doesn't do that. It actually just never returns.
Yeah.
And leaves no error message, no trace of anything. And so I've been troubleshooting through that, dealing with a whole lot of little permissions issues in IIS, a whole lot of trying to get logging.
I'm surprised that there's not a timeout or something on it.
It times out after 20 minutes. That's not really.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean you can tweak it, but it's not exactly a debugging cadence.
No.
So you forget a lot of things, and it's just bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been dealing with that, and I was having to switch from rewriting some JavaScript code to rewriting some C# code to jumping into some Delphi code because I had to rewrite the entry point of that DLL.
Talk about changing mental context.
Yeah, I had to rewrite the entry point of that DLL so that it did not give a result to Windows that made it think that it couldn't load the DLL, so it would pass it on and get the pointer back to C#.
Good grief. I have enough trouble switching between JavaScript and C#.
Yeah, this is
talking to each other in very similar language.
Yeah, and this was JavaScript, C#, Delphi, Windows API, all of its legacy code glory.
Uh-huh.
And then SQL on the back end. And so I'm switching between those transparently. I've got all the environments up. And so it's I changed this stored procedure. I run it. It's okay, now it's in the database. Now I'll go over to Delphi. I change stuff. I build. I copy that DLL into the bin directory, or into a drop directory, basically, that my app will, as a post-build step, copy it out to the bin. Mm-hmm. But because it's IIS doesn't necessarily go, oh, hey, here's your bin directory. This is where the binaries are. It goes, no, I'm going to shadow copy these to some rando location on your hard drive. And I'm not going to get anything that's not a managed DLL because I'm an idiot. And you have to basically do a lot of hackery to say, no, you will get this binary and you will load this and enforce that. And it's been pretty rough. And my coworkers and I are all learning things as this is happening. And a lot of the learning is falling on me. Let's just put it that way. It's quite painful. Now, if we get this, our stuff will be an order of magnitude faster, because what we've been doing is we've been using shell execute and calling another executable to do the things we need to do and making it right to the file system and then reading that result and streaming it down. Whereas this way it's a direct memory transfer. So it's faster. You don't have disk IO in the mix.
Yeah.
And there's all the security, because we got secure document type stuff that's going on.
Well, yeah, that makes sense.
There's a huge payoff if this works, but it's awful right now. So yeah, that's what I've been dealing with. That, and, of course I said, I don't know, was it last week before, I had that whole medical thing too.
Yeah.
And that screwed up last week. And I'm still recovering from that because it chewed up a bunch of hours.
Did you ever get results back from it?
They called and I could not get my stupid phone to respond. And I couldn't get a hold of a human when I called back.
I hate that.
And yeah, so yeah, I'm not best pleased. I'm going to call them in the morning and just bug them, but I'm catching up, and I'm catching up through this stuff, which is like the least ideal way to catch up with anything. Because, a lot of stuff you can, like, if you're reasonably good at it and it's what looks like 6 hours of work, you might pull it off in 1 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this, it's like, oh, it looks like 6 hours of work and it's actually 4 days.
Yeah.
And like you were behind when you got there. And so that's what I'm dealing with. So how about you?
Earlier today, I had my own issues with JavaScript. We're trying to add an object. We're trying to add an array of objects to another object, within that object.
Like as a property?
As a property of that object, yeah.
So append them.
Append them. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the words for it.
Okay.
I know how to do it. It's that junior
English.
It's that junior dev conundrum of I know how to do it, but I can't always describe what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Without going into the details of the code. So we had 2 that were similar and had an issue of realizing that JavaScript references the object and doesn't save the object itself. So what I ended up having to do was create a new object for each one, or a new instance of the object for each one.
Okay.
And then move over the parameters individually rather than all at once, because all at once you get the same hash key for both.
Oh, yeah, you probably could have done, since it's JavaScript, you probably could have done one of the array operations like a map.
I thought about that.
And made it do copies. I mean, you still would actually be creating new instances,
yeah.
But it would have done it all in one shot instead of a loop. But even then, it's like, just do it.
Yeah, this was only 2. Like, there's only ever going to be 2.
Yeah, that's not worth
here. So, yeah.
Well, it's a nice show-off thing, but it's not. Not big a deal. Not big enough.
That would have taken longer than 30 minutes to get up, running, tested, and hey, it works now.
Yeah, and you don't want to have to go get another cup of coffee.
Yeah,
if you don't have to.
And then this afternoon, I dropped a table at work today.
You didn't flip a table, so you weren't Jesus in the temple. So that's good.
No, but I did make a joke about flipping tables. So our DBA is out of town, and we had a little bit of an issue that I tracked all the way back to the fact that the foreign keys in a join table were set as unique when they shouldn't have been.
Yeah,
it should have been a many to many, but it was set to a 1-to-1.
I'd be curious how that entered the development cycle, because that takes more work.
I know how it entered. It's because originally it was said it was going to be 1-to-1.
Oh, then that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it changed as
things went
on. As things went on, like it probably changed within the first or second sprint.
Yeah, but by then it was
already there, and it didn't cause an issue until
it did.
It did. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And
the thing is like with what you had to do, you pretty much had to nuke that whole table and bring it back up, because I mean you could have. Let's see, you would have had to drop the foreign keys, then you would have had to drop the indexes, then you would have had to rebuild the index and put it back on, and then rebuild the foreign keys. Or you could just say, hey, nuke this table after I get the script for it, and I change the little pieces and I put it back.
Yes, which is what I did, because that was a lot faster. And
now, have you, I'm going to throw a curveball at you because I'm a jerk. Have you considered how this is going to get migrated to your test environment? Because you're going to have the same constraint there, and probably some test data that people don't want to get rid of.
Well,
Or is that going to be somebody else's problem because you're a smart dude?
Yes, and yes. I backed up the data before I did this because it's, we're not even in production yet, so we're still in early stages. There wasn't a whole lot, so I was able to back it up. Actually, let me just tell you what happened. So we get to the point where we figure out what it is, and then we're talking about it, and because our DBA is away, we realize nobody has permissions to go in and change this, so we have to go get, our boss to come and do this for us. And as we're talking, I realize, oh, wait, I have those permissions because when I started was right when they changed and we're going to start giving out permissions to all the developers to access the dev database.
Right.
And so I said to my lead dev, I'm like, hey, I think I have permission, but I didn't want to drop the table just in case I actually do have permission.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I know some SQL, but I'm not the best with what we're using. And so he said, well, make a backup and then try it. And I was like, I don't know how to make a backup. So
time to learn.
Yeah. 5 minutes later, he's walking back over because he sits right in front of me. And he's walking back to his desk, and I was like, made a backup. And he looks at me. He's like, this is, like I said, this is the end of the day. So he's like, when do you have to leave? And my response was about a minute ago.
Yeah.
He's like, but I really want to stay and do this. He's like, you are bound and determined to drop a table today.
Oh, I had that discussion with my boss today.
To which I said, well, I already flipped one. I might as well drop one.
Yeah. It's like I was dealing with my issue today, and nothing worked until 3:15 today.
Mm-hmm.
And, I leave at 4:15.
Yeah.
And, the first beginnings of, hey, here's a crack in the wall here.
Yeah.
Here's something I can go after. That's when that happened. And so I was scrambling around that last hour of the day. And he goes, why don't you go home and you can deal with it in the morning? And I'm like, no, there's blood in the water right now. And he goes, yes. And if you swim in blood in the water, you get eaten. Go home.
Yeah. That was.
And I'm totally not going to follow his advice. After you leave tonight, I'm going to remote in. But,
Well, I would do the same too. I can't really. Yeah. With that said,
roll the music.
Go ahead and roll the music. This week for IoTs, I have a platform, and this is a really awesome community for sharing and discussing IoT projects and ideas. It is hackaday.io. I just want to quote from their front page. Hackaday.io is the world's largest collaborative hardware development community. And just like any community, it has lots of great projects and lots of abandoned projects. But there are plenty of active and completed ones to look into. They even have contests, discussion boards, and project logs. So as you're building it, you can log your process. Personally, I just found out about it today. So I haven't put anything up yet, but I did join the community. And by the time this episode comes out, you guys could probably get on and look for some of the projects that I've done or that I am doing. And again, that is hackaday.io.
Nice.
So, who's talking to us?
Well, my buddy Christian, who's in my mastermind group with me, actually left us a review. And
awesome.
He says, sharp practical tips on how to level up your dev career. I enjoy the two unique perspectives on topics, and the flowing conversations keeps me tuned in to Will and BJ. There's always a small nugget I pick up on each episode. And this actually means a lot coming from him because the software that he's working on, he's got his own stuff that he's building.
Yeah.
It's for semiconductor labs for their probing tests.
Oh, neat.
So he's got some pretty hardcore concepts that he's dealing with. And so
that is cool. Yeah. Well, hey, thank you so much, Christian. We do have some complete developer swag just for you. Get in touch with Will. He'll get me your address and we can get it sent to you. Guys, if you'd like some complete developer swag, leave us a review on iTunes or comment on the website or any of our social media. We put all our shows on Google+, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I know Will and I hang out on Twitter quite a bit, and we check our Facebook once or twice a week.
Troll people mostly.
Yeah.
And then we get on LinkedIn every so often, and then Google Plus when we remember that Google Plus exists.
All right, this week we're talking about T-shaped developers. Historically, developers have been specialists. For example, in web development, you were either a front-end developer or a back-end developer. You built your portion of an app and didn't worry about the other areas. And the idea behind being a T-shaped developer is to have a broad base of knowledge and then dive deep into a few areas. So we're going to start off defining T-shaped developers. And I have a quote from David Walker. A T-shaped developer has one or more deep skill sets of knowledge complemented with broad generalist knowledge across an entire solution.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess I see how the T, because I was just thinking, initially because they got a big head. like it's a profile thing. So
you see,
this is better.
I have these two things going through my head. I don't know if you remember the letter people from when we were very young children.
Vaguely, yeah.
I've got that
like
Mr. T with his tall teeth and the Texas draw. And then I've also got...
I was wondering where you're going with this.
I've got a book that I can see from here, I think. It's Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, where they worship Henry T. Ford. So what you want to do, you think of the shape of the capital letter T. So
and it's like the vertical bar is the stack.
Yeah. So the shape of the capital T, the horizontal portion at the top of the T, represents your knowledge base. This should be broad enough to cover several areas of programming.
Okay.
You want to be able to cover like a complete stack with the...
I was looking at it like rotated 90 degrees from where you are. Okay.
Yeah. You want to be able to cover the complete stack in breadth.
Right.
Like if you're a C# developer like us, you want to have some knowledge of front end and of design and UI, UX, and some knowledge of data structures, databases, networks, things like that.
File systems.
Yeah. The vertical stem of the T, the part going down, your depth is your specialty or area of focus in programming. So with C#, that would mostly be mid-tier.
Yeah.
But you could also be a DBA and your focus is on data structures, data storage, things like that. That's where your most knowledge is in, but you also know a little bit about mid-tier stuff, a little bit about front-end stuff.
Yeah. It's, and I keep coming back to this as another way to look at it. It's almost like the way that like multi-level marketing people tell you to do things. Mm-hmm. It's the breadth of your network is what keeps you stable, and the depth is what gets you the money.
Yes, exactly. The example I have, and we've kind of already covered it a little bit, is the full stack web developer, where you need to know some of each level, but have your depth in one. So
at least one.
Yeah, at least one. So, be that building pages in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, understanding the HTTP and how pages send and receive information, or the magic of the middleware, knowing a language used to build web apps like PHP, Ruby, C#, Python, so forth and so forth. Or understanding JavaScript as a language to code logic on the client side. And then, knowledge of how data is stored and retrieved from a database. Now, usually you would pick one or two of these for your depth, but you would have a generalized knowledge of each.
Yeah, and usually you pick one or two. If you're picking one or two for the depth, they also should probably be adjacent.
Yes.
Like, you don't want to be, I'm a pro at, CSS and JavaScript and SQL. Because then you've got like this black box in the middle that all your stuff goes through, and that's not really a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, it's usually, if you're going with multiple ones, it's usually one side by side.
Yeah.
So you get a bit of a breadth of vertical side of your T.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of get into that a little bit when we talk about how to become a T-shaped developer.
And the big thing is, as far as, you've got the breadth so that you can continue to work and actually be reasonably effective. You also have the depth. And the deal there is, being a master at that one area.
Yeah. So I have these divided into, like Will said, depth and breadth. And your breadth, your wide knowledge base makes you a jack of all trades. You need to be, you don't need to be an expert at everything, but you need to have a working knowledge, especially when you're working on a team, because that way you understand how what you're writing is used by other members of your team. Plus, you can help them with what they're doing. And you need to be able to build a functioning, if not perfect, app.
Right, end to end, and then have the better people, at that particular thing come in. The other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to be the guy that is scared to death of certain parts of the system.
Yeah.
You don't somebody that's terrified of SQL or somebody that's terrified of JavaScript. That's a really bad place to be, because then you don't have control over how those things interact with your stuff.
Well, I'll tell you, I was super excited today, and I mentioned this earlier in the episode, but about getting to drop a table.
Yeah, because that means you had database permissions and you showed your value in there.
And it terrified me.
Yeah.
I wanted to do it because I was absolutely scared of it. I'm very comfortable with C#. That's my depth. I'm okay with JavaScript, and I'm getting more depth in that now. But SQL is something that I have a little bit of knowledge in. Like, I have enough knowledge to find what I'm looking for and to do a few minor things there. But I really don't understand the environment and how to work with, I guess it's an IDE that we're working with.
Yeah.
Within SQL. And so having higher ups put faith in me to do that, it was terrifying.
Well, and that's the point that you got to strike and hit that.
Yeah, it was terrifying in the exciting terrifying. Like, I was hyped up, and that's why I was willing to stay an extra 30, 45 minutes after I was supposed to leave, because I was excited about getting to do this and,
being trusted with that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and you definitely want, when you're feeling that way, that's when you want to get on it, because if you don't, you're going to become the guy that's scared to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other thing is, like, as you get more experienced and people expect that you have these, this knowledge and this experience, and you don't, now there's more to lose when you screw up. Because, like, if you're a junior dev and you screw up the database, people will cut you a lot more slack than if you're a senior dev.
Yeah, exactly. Next is, like, diving deep. And that's a good description of the breadth or the width of knowledge. But diving deep into the vertical part of the T, this is where you are a master or expert in one area. This is the focus of your training and effort. You want to become a resource in this area. And it's also where you probably prefer to work. I know if I had my druthers, I would always code in .NET C# because I really enjoy it. I'm starting to enjoy JavaScript even more. I liked it before, but I'm most comfortable there.
Yeah, and I'm getting to where I like lower and lower level stuff. Like, I don't want the system doing anything for me.
Yeah. And this is your functional area, your discipline, your specialty. This is the area that people come to you to ask questions, or this is when you're in a team, you get the harder stuff in that area. Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm getting to deal with right now is I get a lot of the really hard JavaScript and then a lot of the really hard interactions between backend components and Delphi components. Mm-hmm. And then occasionally I get to sneak out and, bust a really hard stored procedure or something. But, of course I get a lot of nasty C# too. If it has to deal with expression trees or something like that, everybody else just goes, yep, it's his. And a lot of that's just, they don't want to mess with it. I'm starting to think like you a little bit when it comes to expression trees, because I'm able to look at them and understand them. Yeah. I don't know, because maybe it's the real world experience, but I'm able to look at them and understand what they're doing and understand why. Yeah. It may also be my boss is also very good with expression trees, and his influence on top of your influence
it's making me better at it. But I can see from before I started the job to now the difference in my knowledge when I just look at something new and go, oh, I can follow that and know exactly what it's doing. But why do you want to be a T-shaped developer?
Well, for one thing, it's a little bit more agile the way you work. Like you can switch tasks. When you get burnt out on one thing, because I know that for a while there I was getting really, really tired of .NET. Because I did a lot of middle tier stuff, and so jumping back and doing some Delphi was relaxing to me.
Which would not be for some people.
Yeah, which is
exciting for me because
that's very counterintuitive to a lot of folks. And the same thing with SQL. Like if it's stuff that's off of your main line, being able to jump in there and do that, sometimes that's honestly just giving you a break.
I know that's one thing I love about my job, and I think one of the reasons that I got hired is because I love that about it, is I'm on a team where my primary function is the API, the C# middleware.
Right.
But I can also jump and do JavaScript and help out on the front end and help out a little bit. The other .NET developer she's better with the SQL stuff.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's hard to wrest control of that away from somebody that's a real solid DBA.
Yeah. Well, we have a DBA, but we have 2 .NET developers, and I'm more on the front end, and she's more on the SQL database end. But what's cool is we were talking today, and she was asking me about some of the stuff we were doing on the front end, and I was asking her about some of the stuff on the database side. And it's like there's that interest. Even our front end guy is wanting to learn C# now.
Yeah. Well,
our whole team we're intermingling, and it's great because, I can go and help out our front end guy with the front end stuff. And as he's learning C#, he can come and, if anything, be a squeaky rubber duck for me.
Yeah.
When I'm working on stuff, and I've done that for him on the front end stuff.
Yeah, and I mean that's the same thing with me jumping back and forth between Delphi and SQL and JavaScript, and
it makes a
CSS
better.
And else.
It makes more flexibility within the team, but it helps to avoid too much work for one specialist, and it makes we understand what each other is doing.
Right.
So when I'm talking to our front end guy about what's going on the front end, I can say, all right, well, when we wrote this, of course, he did make the joke that he's like, well, it's either something that we wrote or something that you wrote that broke it.
Yeah. Yeah. And when they can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, that's the thing. It's one of those things where, I can talk to him about what's happening when he calls the API, and he understands that because he's learning some of that. And then he can tell me how he is doing what he's doing on the front end, and I can understand that because I know that. And it's a
you
great
have something
team
to trade.
Cohesion. Yeah.
Yeah, you have something to understand. Because there's one of the guys I work with that I didn't talk to him very much until I started doing Delphi, because he's one of the Delphi developers. And and I didn't know that I had anything in common with him. We like a lot of the same shows and all that kind of stuff, but I never realized it until I started having to bug him with Delphi questions.
Yeah.
And it's not my boss. It's it's the other Delphi developer. It's just I never had much interaction with him. I didn't report to him or anything. And now we talk all the time, and that started with, hey, I've got a problem. I'm doing something dumb. I think it was like, how do I do multiple conditionals in an if statement? Because Delphi, you have to do parentheses around each, because it, for whatever reason, just asking for a little help on something like that created the beginnings of team cohesion, and it's huge as a benefit.
That makes sense. Also,
you have Frankenstein. I'm sorry. Sorry. Some people will get that joke.
Frankenstein.
Yeah, Frankenstein applicains. And that's the way everybody's app is getting to be now. People build parts of the app with whatever is at that point the best tool for what they're doing. and then they stitch those pieces together. And as a result, you cannot be in a single silo and be useful.
No, you can't.
Well, you can be, but you are easily outcompeted there by somebody that's a generalist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the thing is, it's not don't have a specialty. It's have that specialty, but also be able to function outside of that specialty. Because the big thing here is because things are being pieced together like that, you're on here because you're really good at this.
Yeah.
Well, what if something better comes along or we decide we don't need that? You can either be gone or, yeah, you're on here because you're really good at this, but you can also help out here, here, and here.
Right.
3 or 4 other places. So you're an asset to the team no matter what. We don't want to get rid of you. We just may move your focus because, maybe for the life of this project, you're going to be helping out in 2 or 3 other areas that aren't your area of expertise, but we can still keep you on. You're still working.
Yeah, it gives management more flexibility.
Yeah. And it gives you more flexibility because you may go, oh, I
enjoy this more. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the way I'm starting to feel about the Delphi stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I tell it to do something, it does it, and it does not do things I don't tell it to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge relief coming out of a managed framework where it's like, oh yeah, it didn't, it copied this byte array from this pointer and then, did something with it versus doing something with the byte array I originally gave you.
No.
And now I have a memory leak because of something that's completely undocumented.
And on the same lines, having that broad knowledge base gives you a starting point for if your area of expertise ever gets outdated.
Yes. And that's, since I've been at this, let's just say a while, I've seen more things come and go. Like I remember people that, they got big into Silverlight when it came out,
mm-hmm.
and they invested all this time and effort. They didn't, especially they were like, junior devs, and they got good at Silverlight and their pay rate went up through the roof. But then there were all the security problems with plugins in the browsers, and so they killed Silverlight. And
a lot of people didn't have anywhere to go because they were Silverlight developers and nothing else.
Yeah. And I saw the same thing with Access developers.
Mm-hmm.
And VB6 developers, although some of them are still around. Of course, if you hang around long enough, then, the market shrinks enough where you can take it over again. But you have to survive the interim decade and a half to do that. And it's not really, not so optimal for the retirement.
That's true. Of course, having that breadth of knowledge is how you survive that interim.
Because the skill that you used to be the specialist in may be something that, 10 years later, you're brought in to look at because you remember things.
Yeah.
That's also a situation I'm in my job with all the GDI stuff.
Oh, yeah. So now that we've convinced you that you want to become a T-shaped developer, let's talk about how to do that. Now, traditional schooling or traditional learning typically isn't focused on T-shaped development, mainly because it's easier to teach a specialty.
Yeah.
It's hard to know what skills are going to be important outside of a specific context. So it's hard to teach broad, general knowledge. There are certain things that you need to know. You need to be able to set up a website in HTML. I mean,
yeah.
There's some things that are set as, all right, these are kind of just core to what you're doing. But then when you get into JavaScript, like what frameworks?
Yeah.
How deep in those frameworks do you go if JavaScript is not your focus, your specialty?
Well, and the other thing too is, especially with JavaScript, is like, okay, you learned it in school. Congratulations. You graduate a year from now and, you're on version 1 of this framework. Version 4 is going to be out by the time you get a job. That stuff is so fast moving. So that causes problems. The other thing is like just the publishing cycle for textbooks and things. So you're not going to get this stuff in school. And the other thing too is a lot of I don't want to rag on teachers too much at a college level, but you will also encounter the phenomenon of having the teacher that's a specialist in something because they can't be a generalist.
Remember now, we're going to be at the school where you got your CS degree or CIS degree.
Right. But I did have some teachers like that. And then I also had some teachers that's like, they could do a broad range of things, but they had extreme depth in one or two things. And those were the best teachers, but that's not the whole population of them. And
yeah, I know some of those.
Yeah. And it's just that's not something that's reasonable to expect in a normal education environment with the pay scale. Because I mean, that's the other thing too. It's like, look, you're not paying these people more than they would get in the private sector outside of the school environment. So you're not going to get people like the people that are there are there. They're not going to, the pay scale outside the university is much higher. And as a result, your teachers and even in like coding schools, you're going to have a lot of them that just, they don't have the general knowledge. Cause if they did, they would be making their living elsewhere. Like it wouldn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Find areas at your company that, you can learn and add value to. When you're doing this, think about what is your specialty. We discussed earlier how, if you're going to have multiple specialties or branch out, you want to branch out from where you already are. So what is your specialty? Are you a front-end person? Is your specialty JavaScript, HTML, CSS? Then instead of trying to jump and do SQL, branch out to learning a little bit of your middleware. Pick up some C# or some PHP or Ruby, Python, stuff like that.
Or Node. Just take your JavaScript skills to the back end.
Yeah, that's true. Move that way. Look at how it relates to your specialty.
Yeah, and how the pieces fit together. And of course, we mentioned Node. Like if you're good at JavaScript and you want to do database stuff, MapReduce queries in something like, MongoDB is also a possibility. Like that's you really could skip the middle tier. Of course, the thing is it's Mongo is the middle tier then because you can actually directly call it the database from client side.
You don't want to do.
You don't really want to do that necessarily, but it's.
But also, what can you learn in that context that will provide value to your coworkers, to your team, and help take up some of the slack? When they're overwhelmed and a little bit of mid-tier stuff and can do some minor things, maybe some minor bug fixes, or even go in and do some documentation.
And actually, this is a good way to learn in open source as well. If you jump in and you're helping with docs, it's a whole lot. You're not going to get told, oh, well, you should learn how to do these things. They go, oh, wait, this is somebody that's actually bothering to write docs. Like, that's a good way to learn. Like, think about the incentive structure for incenting the people that you're working for to teach you. Because once you have that figured out, the ability to get into a different specialization or into, to get generalization into an adjacent vertical is a whole lot easier.
And you want to come at this with a plan. I mean, if you haven't picked this up from us yet, just about everything we suggest you do, you got to have a plan for.
Yeah.
That's the way we function. That's just the way you're going to function best.
Well, it just makes it where you can actually make decisions quickly.
When I was doing the research for this outline, there's a bit of back and forth between whether you should do width first or depth first in your learning. Personally, I think that you should start with a strong core knowledge in an area that allows you to be effective. That's going to be your fastest way.
That allows you to get hired.
Yeah. And then build out from there.
Right. Because if you have a lot of breadth, you're not particularly useful at any one thing. Mm-hmm. And so it's more economically efficient for them to hire someone who is. Whereas like if you're really good at JavaScript and you can get interviewed on a team that doesn't have a good JavaScript person, then you're it. Like they don't remember that you came in as a junior dev and this is the only thing you were good at. If you were expanding as you were there, that fact gets forgotten.
Yes.
People remember what they get from you.
Now, there are some pitfalls to avoid in this process. And the first is becoming a jack of all trades, but a master of none. These are the people that can write hello world in 20 different languages.
Well, and you and I won't say we've made a game of spotting them, but you do, if you do things for junior developers, like you're doing coding events and those kind of things, those people are very easy to spot because they'll tell you, oh, I've done Python, I've done Perl, I've done Ruby, I've done JavaScript, I've done Erlang. Well, they won't tell you they've done Erlang because if they're done Erlang, they're crazy. But like that's a different breed of person. But they'll tell you like 15 different languages they've messed with, and they've never done anything of consequence in any of them. Mm-hmm. And like you don't want to be that person because that person does not have a value that they bring to the table economically.
I mean, they never delve deep into any area, and most of the time it's because they move on when things get challenging.
Yeah.
Or when they get bored.
Yeah, and it's usually the latter.
Yeah.
Because they feel, there's a tendency to go, okay, I've done something in this language, therefore I'm okay, and I can move on. Mm-hmm. And that does not get you hired.
And I've seen it in people that I was learning with in groups where we were learning stuff, and they ultimately just dropped out of the group because they at first were doing the coursework and stuff like everyone else, and then it started coming to class just barely caught up on the reading.
Yeah.
And then, I say class, it was like a
Twitter chat or something, wasn't it?
It was a group study session.
Yeah.
They started coming to the group study session, just having done the reading, but not having done the examples and the problems. And then they started coming not having done the reading.
Yeah.
And then they started missing, and then they just never came back. And I've seen it, and it was sad because some of them were actually pretty talented.
Yeah, they had the intrinsic talent, but the problem is they didn't put in the work.
No, they didn't, and that was the thing. I don't know if it was they got bored or it started to get difficult, and that intrinsic talent wasn't covering the bill.
Yeah,
and they didn't want to put the effort in to cover the bill.
Well, you and I ran into this when we had the martial arts group.
Yeah.
If you remember, and it was a very similar dynamic because somebody gets bored with the basics and getting one or two things down. Mm-hmm. And so they've got to always be doing a new technique and trying it. And, you can eventually pick up on general principles that way. But if you get in a fight between then and when you've actually got the general principles down, you're just going to get handed to you. Mm-hmm. And, the basic practice and the deep mastery of things has got to come first before the generalization, just in that sense, because it gives you the discipline to actually keep going. Yeah,
exactly. Now, on the other end is the person that tries to be the master of all trades.
Yeah. And, the thing about that is you can actually be better than most in a lot of areas. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of work, and you have to keep up in all those areas. Because if your build is a master level, people think that, okay, well, this person's not going to screw up. And if you got 15 areas that you're a master level in, as far as people are concerned, they get mad when you do screw up.
Yeah, and it gets to the point where it's difficult to switch context.
Yeah.
That's like what you were saying when you were switching from JavaScript to C# to Delphi. I'm like, and SQL. Yeah, I have enough trouble just switching from C#.
Well, and I was also doing sysadmin stuff too, because jumping around and getting into IIS and all that. And that's about the upper limit of my capability is like 5 or 6 things transitioning smoothly between them. Like if I was having to deal with network infrastructure on top of that, or, backups or anything like that, that would have been it. I couldn't have done it.
Like at work, because I mostly help out with the front end when I'm not doing, my primary, which is a C#. I can make that transition fairly easily. Like I'm still new at switching context like that. So it's difficult if I've been working on one, like if I've been doing C# all morning long, I need to take lunch and then come work on the JavaScript.
Well, part of that is learning how to context switch.
Yeah.
Like I go on a walk or I do something like I get out of the room and I come back in, and that it's almost like a brain reset trick that seems to help.
Well, that's why I like to do one in the morning, one in the afternoon, or like split it up with lunch or breakfast, because I get to work pretty early, so I can get in, do some work, go get breakfast, and come back and do something different.
Yeah, the other party trick I have for this, for context switching, because I do it a lot, is I have different playlists. So, and this is going to sound really weird. Like if I'm doing heavy JavaScript and CSS and HTML, like the whole client side thing, I tend to be better with a little bit of an edge. And so I'll listen to gangster rap.
I thought you were about to say a little bit of rock and roll.
And then I get
doing C#, a little bit of country.
And then if I'm doing, middle tier, that kind of stuff, I still have to go, I still want to go pretty fast. And so that tends to be more heavy metal. Whereas if I'm doing, SQL or if I'm doing, design specs or things like that, it tends to be more towards classical. And then I'll get into like classic rock type stuff if I'm just trying to block out noise.
Yeah, I usually, if I'm pounding away at the code and just not putting a lot of, I don't want to say not putting thought into it, but I'm not doing a lot of like.
Your burn rate mentally is not so bad.
Yeah, when that's the case, it's usually heavy metal.
Yeah.
But when I've got to put a lot of thought and effort into what I'm doing, like one day I spent like over half a day on 2 lines of code. That day, I listened to a lot of Lindsey Sterling.
Right, you get into the classical for
the
that.
Classical, or I like it because she's like hip hop, violin, EDM kind of mix, and so it's like it's this good. Well, I started listening to her when I was studying for med school, and it's like the perfect study music.
Yeah, well, I mean, and my secret weapon, and I hate to say this because it really makes me sound bad. If I absolutely positively have to get something done and it's extremely difficult, I get an energy drink and I listen to Ace of Base. And I will burn through stuff like at a completely unsustainable rate, and I don't understand.
What is it about Ace of Base? Because I don't remember high school.
I don't know why, and I think that's probably what that's from. It's
I
like
used to code listening to the CD that had the sign on it. I don't remember the name of the CD now, but I would put that in, and I would spend hours listening to that over and over again.
Yep,
and just
I don't know why that works so well, and I think that's a generational thing. I think everybody's got their own, but like if it's absolute, just desperation, I have to crush something.
Yeah,
and it's complex enough for whatever reason that's like the right cadence, and it works great for me.
It's funny, I've talked to some other people around our age about that, and I was like, I just remember high school, I used to listen to Ace of Base and code, and they're like, oh man, I love listening to Ace of Base when I code. And I'm like, I don't know what it is, but Ace of Base
works like a champ, and it's not something a straight dude admits to. But it works. But that whole thing of being able to switch your, getting practice at switching your mental state, that's the other thing with this breadth thing, right? Because people are going to pop in and want you to do something else or want you to help troubleshoot a problem.
Yeah.
And being able to do that switch. And I actually know a couple of guys that think I'm really bad at switching contexts. And part of the deal is they catch me when I'm in the middle of something else and bug me with something that's lower priority.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, you have a hard time switching context. It's like, I don't have a hard time switching context. I have a hard time switching context for your priority. That's not the same thing.
I wouldn't say you have a hard time switching context for their priority. I would just say that you have your priorities right.
Yeah. But I can switch context, and you'll build up kind of a repertoire of ways to do that over time.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to do that will make you more valuable. Now, so the other thing with the master of all trades, and this is one that will get you, is burnout. Because if you can legitimately do all the things and you're legitimately keeping up on all the things, you don't get a moment of peace.
No, you don't.
You can't ever say, oh, that's not my thing. Send that to so-and-so because it's on you. And what ends up happening is you're constantly stressed, and because there's some things I won't tell people that I'm capable of doing because I know that if I have to take that on, it's going to be too much.
I won't say what skills I downplay and what skills I legitimately, do have, legitimately am in the process of learning because my boss listens to the show.
Yeah.
But I do downplay some of my skills because of that. And a lot of times it's more deferring to the person who specializes in that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, too.
I just gave myself away.
The other thing that happens there, too, is that it engenders a lot of people feeling threatened when you're good at too many things and they're not. That's a way to make an enemy that never directly shows themselves, that does passive-aggressive stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So you have to be a bit careful politically with this kind of stuff as well.
And the third point on this triangle of pitfalls is the one way is the only way. This is a complete lack of breadth, and this is more like an I or number one shaped developer.
Let's be honest, the shape of it is a raised middle finger towards the rest of the team.
Yeah, exactly.
It's completely vertical. That's the only thing they do, and they're not going to go outside of that.
Yeah.
And, the thing about this is like the specialization helps you get work. But the other thing about specialization is for insects, like ant colonies. Like, you don't want to be that mindless drone. You have to be extremely good at the one thing you do for that being the only thing that you do to pay off.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Like, Michael Phelps is known as an excellent swimmer.
And a pothead.
He's an excellent pothead, too. No, he really just got caught.
Yeah.
Cheech and Chong are excellent potheads.
Yeah.
And that's what they do. Michael Phelps is not going to have a TV show about pot like Cheech and Chong.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he's got the one thing that he does, but you have to be way, way up there in skill to be at that level. And unless you are just hell-bent on competing that way, that's not a particularly sustainable model, especially in an environment that changes all the time.
Yeah. Well, that's true. That's true. Well, hey, guys, that pretty much wraps it up for us. Before we close everything out, Will, what do you have for us this week for Tricks of the Trade?
Well, I'm going to point out something about program architecture, and this goes all the way down to, the function level and all the way up to, the actual like service level. And that is that the way computers do things does not match people as far as specialization. It's better in general to have a computer process that does one thing and does it really, really well. And the reason for that is the lack of complexity. That makes it easier to reason about things. It makes it easier to change parts out. And this kind of ties back into what Beej was saying earlier with the whole T-shaped developer. The reason you want to have a broad area of knowledge is so that you cannot be as easily replaced by a machine. That will put you ahead because, the machine may be able to do something like generate the middleware for some, at some point in the future. It's going to take longer before a machine can generate the entire app. So the broader that your skill set is, the less likely that you can be replaced by a machine. On the other hand, if you're building an app, you want it as narrow as possible because that allows the machine to be replaced by another machine or to be tuned. So these constraints are something to bear in mind that they don't exactly match. In fact, they're kind of inverted. It's just something to think about a little bit. So that's what I've got.
Stand by for Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment for us, please email us at neckbeards@completedeveloperpodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed under Creative Commons. The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up to our email list, be sure and check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with the news about the show. Thanks for listening. See you next time.